Good afternoon, and welcome to our panel discussion of ethics in medicine, criminal justice, and business. We're going to be looking at competing perspectives today. For those of you that are not familiar with the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative Collegiate Program at UCCS College of Business, I am Tracy Gonzalez-Padron, Director of the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative at UCCS, and a professor in the College of Business. I did mention before that we are recording this presentation, this panel presentation, so we will also have opportunities for you to ask questions. And even if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat, or if you have a comment, because that way we can all get kind of talking about some of the issues. The virtual events, as you know, sometimes come with challenges. And so if you cannot hear, you can put it in the chat. We can't hear somebody, so then we can try to see if that person can get closer to the microphone or things like that. Hopefully the internet works well. Sometimes I even have issues at my home. So if we do have some oops, we'll deal with it, as we're all used to that. One of the neat features of Zoom now with our institutional license that we have is you have the ability to use closed caption. So if you cannot hear very well, you can actually activate the closed caption along the bottom, so then you can actually follow along the presentation. So this panel is going to compare the ethical approaches by doctors, criminal justice professionals, and business leaders. The goal is to have an increased understanding of ethics across disciplines. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dan Olson. Dan is a criminal justice instructor in the School of Public Affairs at UCCS, and he is also an ethics fellow at UCCS. He received his bachelor's in business administration from Michigan State University, my alma mater, and his JD from Thomas Cooley Law School. Something that's very interesting for everyone is that Dan served as a judge advocate in the United States Air Force for over 20 years before retiring in 2017. So I'm looking forward to this panel presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Dan to present the panel.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I see a lot of familiar names out there from different classes. I see colleagues, I see former students, I see folks out there in industry. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you today. We're gonna try something here from about 4:30 to maybe 6 o'clock. If we don't quite go to 6 o'clock, that's okay. But we thought it might be fun, interesting, and challenging to take a look at some ethical dilemmas and look at how different folks in different types of jobs tackle those ethical dilemmas. And so we're lucky to have a few guest speakers with us that we'll be introducing as we go along. And what we're going to do is, and I think we might, can we click on to the next slide there? All right. Yes. So if you're wondering what we're going to do today, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at a few common ethical approaches in criminal justice. I know many of you are criminal justice majors. Maybe you're studying ethics in criminal justice with me right now. Then we're going to take a look at the sorts of ethical approaches that healthcare professionals, medical professionals, doctors use. And then we're going to look at business ethics, particularly the Daniels Fund principles. And then we're going to tackle three sort of traditional ethical dilemmas, and we'll see how folks decide to solve them. Sound good? And we'll have time for questions and answers along the way. So let's go ahead and get started here. Our first panelist is Ms. Christina Bartello. And Christina is a recent UCCS graduate who was in my ethics class, I think last year at this time. And she did such an amazing job that we thought, hey, now she's out there in industry working for the DMV. And we thought, let's have Christina come back, do a little review and recap of what criminal justice ethics is all about. If you're in my ethics class, this is going to sound awfully familiar. If it's been a while since you've looked at ethics, it's going to be a good review. And if you haven't taken ethics yet, it's a good preview of what's coming. So Christina, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, and you're going to talk to us about criminal justice ethical approaches.
All right. Well, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Feels weird to be on this side of things instead of the side of just watching things. But I'm going to cover the criminal justice perspective. You can see on the screen there that we have 5 different perspectives that we're going to cover. So the first one is utilitarianism. So what that one focuses on is emphasizing consequences. If you've taken an ethics class before, this is one of the most common ones that they'll talk about. And what's important to note is that you want to make sure that you're bringing the most happiness for everyone. So, for example, teachers may do certain quizzes like extra credit, or watching things like this because they want to boost the happiness, or pleasure is the common term used in utilitarianism, to make sure that the most people are getting the most out of the situation. There can also be perspectives where, for example, an unfortunate one where you could say there's a robber in the room, but he says he will let y'all go if he only takes 2 hostages. Now, let's say there's about 50 people in the room. You're creating the most happiness by only taking those 2 people. So although it's very unfortunate in the ethics realm, you might want to think about it as, although we have a consequence of losing 2 people, we are bringing the most happiness or pleasure by only keeping 48 and losing 2. So that's the kind of the basics of utilitarianism. Next, we have deontology, which emphasizes duty. So with this one, you really have to focus on that there's a duty to uphold regardless of the consequences. So, for example, like my last example showed that we would be losing 2 people and keeping 48. The deontologist would say that you have a duty to protect everyone if you are a good person by most people's morals. Therefore, you would say that you want to make a different deal with the robber, for example, to make sure that you are keeping everyone safe. Another example, going back to teachers, is although teachers want their students to succeed, they may have to fail you sometime. As teachers, they're not here to give free passes to you. They want you to succeed, but you're going to have to put in a little work to get there. So just know that deontology focuses more on duty versus happiness. Next, we have virtue ethics, which emphasizes character. So Aristotle really goes off of this one, but with virtue ethics, you don't want to worry about consequences or duties. Instead, you want to worry about the type of person you are. Therefore, you want to make sure that you are courageous, or you have integrity, or you're honest. It doesn't matter whether you had a duty to save several people or make sure that you're not failing your class. You have to focus on you as a person, what's right to you. Next, we have peacemaking, which is kind of in the name. You want to make sure peace is being made. So this one really emphasizes compassion and de-escalation. So you've heard probably in the criminal justice realm of peace officers. This is an ethical perspective that they are really going to use. They want to make sure that they are providing compassion and care to the people that they are protecting and serving. And you really want to just make sure that you're focusing on the peaceful outcome, as well as with the peacemaking perspective. That's a lot to say. That you want to realize we're all human beings. We all have emotions. So therefore, it's kind of like a big circle. Make sure you have peace as one. And lastly, we have the rights-based approach. So it emphasizes respect for rights. Therefore, you don't want to violate those rights. If you violate those rights, then therefore you are being unethical. So I hope that this short rundown of the 5 criminal justice perspectives give you a broader idea of how we criminal justice professionals think. So now we are going to pass it off to
All right. Well, thank you so much, Christina. I hope that for many of you, some of those are sounding familiar, right? Right? Some of you might think about torture the terrorists, right? Do I torture the terrorists to save the community? My utilitarians do, but my deontologists would never torture anyone, and probably my peacemakers, right? Now, if none of those resonated with you, let's consider a new approach, medical ethics. And so to speak on medical ethics, we've got a wonderful guest speaker with us from the community, Dr. Aaron Frazier, as you see on the slide. Dr. Frazier has been a practicing physician since 2005, seeing lots and lots of patients since that time. Now, what's really interesting about Dr. Frazier is, in addition, small world, being a Spartan, Michigan State Spartan like myself, I don't know what the chances of that were, but he's also not only a practicing physician, but the, as you can see from the slide, owner of a medical practice right here in town. So sometimes 2 caps, business hat or medical ethics hat. So now you can see that he's in the office. So if there is a medical emergency, he's going to do the ethical thing and go tend to that emergency. And we're just going to cover for him. So Dr. Frazier, thank you so much for being with us, being here with us today. And we're going to go to the next slide and have you explain, well, and just short what medical ethics means to you and other healthcare professionals.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. And Dan was accurate. I do wear many hats, business hat and physician hat, and they frequently conflict, which makes life quite interesting. And so I do have a very interesting perspective on this ethical discussion, and was very excited when Dan asked me to join this panel, as I very much look forward to the conversation ahead. But in general, in relation to the medical ethics, if you just strictly speak medical, everyone's heard of the do no harm, right? So everything we try to do is to improve the individual or improve the person or make them healthier or better. There's actually a phrase we have in relation of do no harm is the enemy of good is better, as in I can do better. And frequently better can do harm. So you frequently have to weigh those options. And obviously, our goal is always to do no harm. And that frequently conflicts. The other part of that conflicted that Dan probably, he knew about too, is I was in the military as well, and deployed to Afghanistan. And so you have an obligation to do no harm, but you also have an obligation to protect yourself, and you have an obligation to protect your patients. And you frequently have that ethical discussion of, okay, do I do harm to protect others that I don't want to harm? So we frequently had that ethical little dilemma as well. I was also the medical director up at the Air Force Academy for a couple of years, in addition to being the now owner and medical director of my own practice here in Colorado Springs. And obviously we always want to do good. And that's what physicians usually go into medicine to try to do good, right? We don't go into medicine to make money I mean, because to be honest, we can work just as hard making a lot more money doing other things. Our goal is to do good. We always are trying to do the right thing by the person, and we never wish the person ill will. So, you know, I have this frequent conversation with patients, not frequent, but luckily, you know, if they have a terminal diagnosis and they say, doc, how long do I have to live? And, you know, statistically speaking, they have maybe 6 months to live. And then they come back and they survived over 2 years, and like, doc, I beat you. Well, we want you to beat us on that. We don't want you to die early. We want you to do good. We want to do good by you. That's always a frequent thing. Like, they have to beat the doctor in relation to that. I'm glad if you beat the doctor in relation to that. All doctors are really glad if you're beat us in relation to that, because we want to do good. We want to do good by you. The other thing that we want to do is we want to respect your autonomy, respect your what you want to do in relation to your health. I frequently tell people, I give the information, I give you the tools that you need to become healthier, to succeed, and it's your choice whether you do it. You have one body, and it's up to you if you want to protect that body or abuse that body. And I'm not coming over to your house to give you your medications. I'm not coming over to your house to make your food. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to give you the information. I'm going to give you the tools to make sure that you can do it yourself. And that's respecting that patient's autonomy, their ability to take care of themselves, and also their privacy. And now the other aspect is, of course, the justice aspect in relation to medical ethics. And this is where frequently, and we're actually going to get into these in relation to the discussions that we will have, but the justice component frequently conflicts with the medical ethics component. But in relation to our licenses, which is frequently held over our heads, the justice side usually wins out. But especially when it comes to, well, you'll see when we get into the discussions. But I mean, justice can go from anything from HIPAA violations, which is a whole other discussion and panel issue, to legal ramifications, to medications, and all sorts of other stuff. So with that, I'm going to turn that back over to Dan. Just that's very brief medical ethics. There's literally classes and classes on it. So very, very brief. Dan, if you take it away.
All right, thank you so much. All right, now the last thing we're going to do here, so we've talked a little criminal justice ethics, we've talked a little medical ethics, just sort of in a nutshell. Let me go into business ethics with you. And so if you're taking classes over in the School of Business, you might be learning various ethical approaches. And one common approach is what we would call the Daniels Fund ethical principles, and it's principle-based ethical decision making. And the idea is by following an ethical code, not only are we ethical, but we can be an upstanding business, survive in a competitive marketplace, win customers, right? And so many business professionals would say that ethics, being ethical, is the ultimate competitive advantage. I mean, look at these principles. Wouldn't you want to do business with someone who valued these principles and applied these every day? Someone who acted with integrity, in other words, who is honest with you? Businesses are about building stakeholder relationships. If you're the owner of a corporation, you've got to think about your employees, your customers, your stockholders, your bondholders, the broader community that you operate in, right? Accountability, accepting responsibility for the things you've done well and poorly. Transparency, open and truthful communications with customers, suppliers, competitors, government regulators. Right, you know, we're going to be honest, we missed that deadline, right? Fairness. You'll see terms such as fair competition. Respect, similar to autonomy. We're going to respect the rights, freedoms, and views of others. One of my favorite as a lawyer, comply with the law, not only the technical parts of the law, but the spirit and meaning of that law, right? And viability. We're going to make sure that we're doing things that create long-term value. And so these are sort of business terms, but you're going to see a little bit of character ethics built in here. I'm gonna take responsibility for my decisions because that's who I am. You see a little deontology in there. I'm gonna act honestly, whatever the consequences are. I'm gonna follow this law, even though I don't like the law and that law is bad for business. I'm gonna pay this wage because that's what the government says I have to pay. I might work to change the law, but I'm gonna comply with this law. I'm gonna be fair to my competitors. And Mr. Daniels, who came up with these funds, found that this helped his business grow and thrive and succeed, and called it the ultimate competitive advantage. And so these are the types of concepts and ideas you might be learning in our business programs. And I wonder if they sound similar to or different from the other approaches that we've talked about. Well, I hope we get to compare just a little bit as we go through some dilemmas. All right, so for the students out there, I hope one of these approaches or more resonate with you. If not, you can pick and choose and come up with your own ethical approach. Now, let's see. Let's take a few ethical dilemmas and let's try and solve them. Let's see how a healthcare professional would think through things, how a doctor would think through things. Let's see how Christina thinks through things. And let's think about how a business owner or a business ethicist might work through these dilemmas. And so some of these you have seen before, particularly if you've had class with me. They might be an exam question or a homework question. They're all riffs on very traditional, classic ethical dilemmas. They're going to sound familiar, but I've messed with them just to make them a little more challenging. So, hey, as we go through it, we're going to do 3 dilemmas together and we're going to try to solve them. And if we get done early, we're going to do questions and answers, and you can share ideas and please chime in, as we go. It sounds like you all have these scenarios, and we can mess with the scenarios as we go as well. What if this? What if that? What would you do if this happened? Because, if you think the dilemmas are just too easy, we can make them harder. So that said, we're going to go ahead. I think we're all going to come on screen here, and we're going to go through some ethical dilemmas. So I think we might need to just pull up Christina here. And are we ready for our first one? All right. This is a classic ethical dilemma that's been discussed for ages. It's called the burglar and the bullet. So, hey, if you're in my ethics class, we might even discuss this tomorrow. Just imagine the scenario, if you will. A burglar breaks into Olson's house. It's the middle of the night. Olson wakes up, grabs his gun from under his pillow, and shoots the burglar right in the leg. The burglar runs away, wounded, bullet in the leg, but, still alive. Mr. Olson calls the police. The burglar makes his or her way to the emergency room, got a bullet in my leg. And the physicians begin to provide treatment, maybe do an imaging, find where this bullet is, maybe consider the location of the bullet, discuss some options. Meanwhile, though, folks, the police show up at the ER too, all right? Because they're guessing, based on Mr. Olson's input, this guy's got a leg wound he needs to have cared for, all right? So what's gonna happen here? Well, the officer shows up at the emergency room and asks the doctor, hey, take this bullet out of the burglar's leg and turn it over to me as evidence. Because CJ Majors, if that bullet matches the bullet shot by Mr. Olson's gun, pretty good circumstantial evidence that that guy was the one who broke into Olson's house, right? How many people are out there with a bullet in their leg right now at this time, right? So as you can see, the doctor, though, tells the police that the burglar doesn't want the bullet removed. just wants to be stitched up and sent on his way. And as it turns out, where the bullet is, Dr. Frazier can elaborate. Maybe it's in some muscle, and this guy can go his whole life with the bullet sitting in that leg. So the burglar doesn't want it removed. He just wants to be sewn up and sent on his way. Doctor says, I'm not removing that bullet. And of course, here's our ethical dilemma. Maybe the police go and get a search warrant that says, hey, it's okay, go ahead and remove the bullets. Maybe they don't, but let's say they do for now, and we'll consider if that fact is important to you all. Let's just say this is we strongly suspect a repeat offender burglar. He's really good, just doesn't get caught. Without the bullet, case is weak. Olson didn't see too well because it was dark. Let's just say the doctor could sedate the patient without too much problem, because the patient's a little bit weakened. Maybe give him a pill, put him to sleep, maybe mild sedative. We can get it out. It's not too invasive. Not too invasive. I mean, we're not removing a kidney here. Relatively little risk. Whoop, can we go back? I'm sorry. And so let's think about this from an ethical perspective. Look, Christina, what are the police going to say about the ethics? Should the doctor remove the bullet or leave it in there? What's the average police officer going to say about this?
Well, the average police officer is going to say, get that bullet out of his leg, because we have the information that he is a repeat offender. But also, if you're going with our perspectives, the utilitarian would say that you're going to bring the most happiness, and he's going to get the consequences for this guy breaking into Olson's house. So you need to get that bullet out, because the burglar will receive punishment because you have that bullet. That's going to make the case stronger. But also with our repeat offender, if he's broke into, let's say, my house, Dr. Frazier's house, your house, you are going to want to make sure this guy pays for his actions, regardless if he wants to keep this bullet in his leg. But also the deontologist would say, you have the duty to bring justice. As a police officer, you have to serve and protect the public. Knowing that this burglar is still out on the run is not doing your job.
Excellent. And so I think you're right. I'm gonna guess many of my criminal justice students are in total agreement. The only right thing is to get that bullet out of there, protect society from this horrible, awful criminal. But I wonder what a doctor would say about that when you have a patient who doesn't want to be cut open. And we want to respect autonomy, and we want to do no harm to our patient. So Dr. Frazier, what do you think you might do if you were the ER physician in a case like this?
So to be perfectly honest, in this case, until they had a valid search warrant, I would respect the autonomy of the patient. But the second that search warrant was issued, that bullet would come out. And the reason being is part of those four kind of stanches we talked about in relation to the medical ethics, in relation to the justice aspect. If you have a valid search warrant, or you have a valid search warrant which is signed by a judge, you could be putting, as a medical provider, your license at risk if you refuse. And if you're putting your medical license at risk, you're putting your ability to provide for your family at risk. So in my opinion, if we had a valid search warrant, that bullet would come out. Now, say I just ethically had a problem with it and I was in the ER, like, nope, I'm gonna not do this. I'll guarantee you there'll be a physician in the ER that would take over the case and take that bullet out.
Excellent. Now I see a question here. What about the hospital and liability if going against the patient? And this is a little bit where that business ethics comes in, and creating long-term value. I mean, what happens if that patient then, sues you and says, hey, I didn't consent for you to cut me open and jam your forceps into my leg and pull this thing out. Now I shall sue you for lack of informed consent, assault and battery, making my life horrible. And I wonder if a business owner might think, oh boy, I've got to think through some of the business consequences. Interestingly, though, you did notice one of those business principles was respect for rule of law. And so perhaps the fact that we have a valid search warrant makes it not an assault and battery, and makes it so we're sort of balancing rule of law with patient autonomy. I wonder.
So the other aspect too, I see another question here. Does autonomy always trump the other bioethical principles? No, it doesn't. But what if, so I'll pose another question. You say that he could potentially live out his life. You can't tell whether that bullet could travel, could hit an artery. Maybe that bullet could do harm. What about lead poisoning? What about, bullets are made of lead, which affects the ability to do your mentation and all sorts of other stuff. Now, people live with shrapnel in their body all the time. But, could that potentially be doing harm by leaving it in? What about infection? Infection rates with bullet wounds, speaking from experience, are very, very high, which then that person then can get septic. So, not only are you talking about you having a valid search warrant, but you're also looking at the do no harm, and also the fact of, you could be potentially putting this person at significant risk leaving that bullet in. You're saying you could potentially live, but no one can say that for sure.
Excellent. And Christina, what do you think perhaps some of our peacemakers would do? Those who want to de-escalate situations and bring a peaceful resolution. Are we going to get that here by forcing this guy to have this bullet removed?
That's a hard one. I guess I hadn't really thought about the peacemaking perspective, but you'd have to take into consideration that he's a human being just like you are. So if you had a bullet in your leg, would you want to take it out based on procedure? Or if you're in a situation like that, God forbid, I hope none of us are. But I don't know. My gut is kind of telling me that bullet still needs to come out, because although he is a human being, you're trying to de-escalate the situation. If you know this guy has been a repeat offender, like I said before, you're not bringing peace by allowing him to go out on the streets and possibly re-offend.
Excellent. And so folks out there in the crowd, feel free to chime in what you might do. In a case like this, if you were the doctor or you were the police officer, right? And I love what Christina said there about how would you like it if someone did this to you and stuck a knife in there and took out that bullet. That's sort of what deontology is. You're thinking about the rule. What's my duty? My duty is to treat other people as human beings and not as means to an end, right? And so some of my deontologists are going, hey, my duty is to protect and serve and get that bullet out. Others are going, man, how would I like it if that happened to me? And if I'm not comfortable that happening to me, then I'm not doing it. And I do see a question here. So Deb, thank you so much for your question. How our doctors apply those 4 principles together, well, maybe Dr. Fraser can explain for us a little more. Sometimes they conflict, but again, autonomy certainly doesn't always trump. And let's see here, where the power of the state is leveraged to restrict the individual's liberty, shouldn't deference be shown in regards to the rights of the individual? And so that sounds like, let's see, who posted that? Alex, great question. You don't sound like a utilitarian. You sound a bit more deontology or maybe even character-based. Shouldn't we defer to the rights of the individual? Well, we know the man is guilty. What are the consequences of this precedent being used against a potentially innocent? You're right. There's some chance this guy didn't do it. he shot himself in the leg at home, while he was cleaning his weapon, right? And so that's a really good question. And that's one of the challenges with utilitarianism. Sometimes we sacrifice the rights of one for the rights of the many. And that's why some folks are not comfortable with utilitarianism, right? That's the torture the terrorist. I got this terrorist. She knows where the bomb is. Do I torture her? Do I sacrifice all her rights just to protect the rest of us? My utilitarians do. I don't know what my doctors do or my peacemakers do. Oh, Austin wrote a question. I would imagine there is some existing legal precedent. Austin, of course there is. Austin, if I just gave you the answer, it'd be far too easy. So I'm not going to give you the answer. But Austin, what would you do if this happened? And so Austin, just so you know, the courts are pretty consistent that if this was something much more serious, like if the bullet was near a heart and we were going to remove it and the guy was going to die, we're not going to do that. But the more minor the procedure, the more likely the courts are to order it. And so you'll see things like this. The police want the doctor to take a fingernail scraping because under that fingernail is blood and the victim's blood. That's a pretty minor thing to chop off a fingernail, right? But the more invasive the surgery, the different outcomes we're going to have. So, Dr. Fraser, anything you want to add here? Oh boy, now I see all kinds of questions.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of really good questions. One thing I do want to kind of go back up to is what about the hospital and liability for the patient? If we are, as physicians, and this is more on the legal side, given a valid search warrant to do a procedure that we are legally obligated to do, we're covered in relation to that, in relation to liability. Now, what would absolutely suck and would be very difficult is if that bullet did not match the bullet from Mr. Olson's gun and it did go from somewhere else, because then that guy, the person who had the bullet in his leg, would have some precedent to sue, but generally speaking, the provider in the hospital would be protected, but the state would not necessarily, if I remember correctly. And Mr. Olson could probably speak to that a little bit more clearly. And then I'm just reading some of these questions. Austin's, I lean in favor of respecting the patient's rights in this scenario. Personally, there should be more evidence available to prosecute. It's very difficult when you have, as a provider, as a physician, when you're having people say, well, if you don't do it, then, you're going to be in trouble yourself.
I see a pretty good question from Michaela. What if the offender commits another burglary or kills someone? Would the hospital be liable for not allowing the investigation in the first place? So Michaela, that's a really good question. My question for you is, what would you do if you were on that jury? Because look, that burglar comes and breaks into Christina's house. Now Christina sues the doctor's office, because if they had done their job and taken out that bullet, she wouldn't have been the victim of a burglary. Who's going to have to decide that? A jury of people just like you, Michaela. They're going to decide if the hospital can be held liable for that. Probably not. On the legal side, Michaela, we're going to call that superseding intervening cause, because the hospital didn't actually make the burglary happen. The burglar did that on his own, so it'd be unlikely to have liability in that case. But that's a really good question. All right, I see one more here from Michael. Yep. Excellent points, Michael. A lot of this does hinge on the outcome, doesn't it? Whether the guy actually did it. Oh, all right. Steve says, within a deontology, wouldn't the police have a duty to investigate thoroughly? Of course they would. Excellent. And so you might say, I have a duty to get that bullet out. And you're all going to get creative on me now and say, hey, we could find a way to prosecute this guy without the bullet. We could find fingerprints in Mr. Olson's home. We could find other evidence. You could. but I took it out of this one. I took it out to make that a more difficult choice for you. Wow, really good questions. Shall we try another? Let's try another one. This is the classic riff. You remember the old story about the railroad conductor, and he's going down and he's going to run over 5 people. But if he pulls the lever, he can only run over 2 people. Do you pull the lever and kill the 2 to save the 5? This is a bit of riff on that, right? That's called the trolley car problem. My utilitarians pull the lever, and my other ethicists go, oh man, gee, boy, do no harm, do good. But this is a riff. Mr. Olson needs a new heart. That's me, folks. This one's getting old here. There's a 100% chance of mortality if he doesn't get a new heart in it really, really quickly, folks. Mr. Olson happens to be on death row for killing his neighbors. He's been on the list for 12 years now. He's all the way up to number 2. I mean, I started at 100. 12 years later, I'm number 2. I got at least 6 more years of appeals, because you know how long it takes to execute a death sentence, right? Okay, let's go on here. Jill, here's Jill. She's a superstar, awesome 18-year-old high school student who aspires to be a police officer and serve you, the public. There's a 100% chance of death if she doesn't get a new heart in the next few years as well. She's number 27, though, way behind me, folks, way behind. All right, a heart becomes available. Uh-oh, Olson and Jill we were both compatible. It would both help both of us live really long lives. As it turns out, number 1 on the list learns about Jill and says, I wanted to go to Jill. Uh-oh, number 3 through 26 also refused the heart. They wanted to go to Jill. But look at Olson's number 2. He wants it. He wants that heart. So Olson, convicted murderer, right? Killed Jill's parents, but I'm number 2, Jill's 26. But nobody wants the heart. They all want Jill to have it. Folks, could this really happen? Shouldn't we have a law? Well, we don't, because it's never happened quite this way before. So the hospital has an ethics committee. Yes, just an important note. When you're out there at your jobs and you have an ethical dilemma, you can ask for help. And what a doctor might do is say, I'd like to have an ethics committee to help me decide. The ethics committee has just a few hours to make its decision before the heart goes bad, goes to waste. You know what? The woman who donated the heart, her parents, they want the heart to go to Jill. So you got the fundamental fact pattern here. Olson's number 2. He's next on the list. But everybody else kind of seems to want it to go to Jill, who's younger and not a murderer. Let's see, who'd like to go first? Dr. Fraser or Christina? Okay, we're going to go Christina here. Christina, what's my average, I don't know, prison warden, judge, prosecutor, police officer gonna do? Whose side are they on?
Well, first off, when I took this class, this one upset me so much. Just wanted to get that out there because you want it to go to Jill. Obviously, that's my own personal opinion. Like I said, took this class and it bothered me. I was talking to family and friends and I'm like, y'all, what would you do? But if we're talking about a prison ward, they're gonna probably have to stick with the deontology because it's their job to take care of Mr. Olson. So because he's number 2, it has to go to him. And I remember in this class when I took it, that it was brought to our attention that it's actually cruel and unusual punishment if you keep that heart from Mr. Olson, because you cannot keep someone, even if they're in prison, from receiving medical treatment. So unfortunately, the prison ward would probably say it has to go to Mr. Olson, even though Jill seems like she's going to be great in the community.
Excellent, Christina. I see a great comment from Angela, and I'm going to come back to that, Angela, in just 1 minute. Let's see here, Dr. Fraser, what you might do with this if you were the heart transplant surgeon or on this ethical committee.
That's a great question, and I agree with Christina that I have read over this several times, and what would I do? And mine comes down to the if he's still number 2 and she's 27, I would need to know a little bit more how somebody on death row is on a transplant list. I understand that, even if he's a convicted felon, they need to take care of him, medically speaking. But especially if he's already on death row, yes, he's got 6 years of appeal processes to go through, but he's been convicted of a jury of his peers. And my gut feeling in relation to this would be to give it to Jill. If I was on the ethics committee and going around the table, the first question I'd ask is, how is a death row inmate on the transplant list? To be honest.
Okay. And so class, that's a whole ethical debate. We're going to discuss in my class tomorrow. There's 2 really interesting debates about death row inmates and organ transplants. Should a death row inmate be eligible for an organ transplant? Because it's very possible that organ is not used for very long. Just think about it as a utilitarian. Jill could have this for many, many years, but I see Angela says it doesn't matter if Olson's convicted or not. It only matters how sick he is. And he must be more sick because he's been on the list longer. Excellent argue, Angela. Many states are removing the death penalty. Excellent. And it could be that his appeal prevails. And as Alex, I think you pointed out, the legal system can make mistakes. There is an error rate. I mean, there's some chance Olson didn't do it. There's some chance his appeal is granted. Are we simply allowing Jill to jump this line? And so, all inmates are entitled to medical care. Alex, excellent points. And I see, honestly, so I see Caitlin. I think the heart should go to Mr. Olson. He's number 2. He is on that list. He's been on that list for years and years and worked his way all the way up. Plenty of time. And so, excellent point. Let's see. So folks, I don't know what a business ethicist would say here. I think a business ethicist would focus in on long-term value, and you might get more long-term value by giving to a younger person. And so we could also change this to just Olson and Jill, and Olson's not a convicted felon, simply younger, simply older than Jill, and Jill has just much more long life ahead. Now, could Mr. Olson have been on the list before conviction? Excellent. I agree with giving it to Jill. With the virtue ethics, Mr. Olson's character is risky. I would show fairness to Jill. Excellent. Is anyone concerned about the victim's mom? The victim's family would like it to go to Jill? Or would that also set a bad precedent to allow folks to dictate where their organs can and can't go? I wonder. Now, the victim's family shouldn't be able to determine. Yes, Angela, I think we're going to rely on others because that family is not going to be fair and impartial, and perhaps we should have a more formal mechanism, right? And many of you are pointing out states do have laws that regulate this. I don't know that this exact scenario has ever come up. I kind of made it up for Christina's final exam, or maybe it was a homework assignment. Let's see here. Utilitarians might think transplantation is not a good practice when we use numerous healthcare resources for the benefits of only transplant. Oh, excellent, right? We could be using that time and money for other things, Deb. Excellent. Giving the heart to Jill may help others feel justice. Steve, that sounds like a very utilitarian approach. I saw you had mentioned you watched some CSI there. A lot of utilitarianism in that particular show. Really good. Let me just throw out something else for you to think about. Should death row inmates or other inmates be allowed to serve as organ donors? I'm going to just let you think on that, because what could go wrong? Why not? Most of you are thinking, of course they should if they wanted to, if they voluntarily consented, but can someone in that situation truly voluntarily consent? Or would they feel pressure to secure some kind of a better sentence for themselves? Okay, so let's file some of these away here for questions and answers. It's 5:21. That gives us just a few more minutes here. I'm going to try to get through one more scenario, and then maybe we'll do some questions and answers. I hope you're having fun with these. Now, to report or not report, let me just give you oh, okay, please, yeah, go ahead. So many of you may be familiar with mandatory reporting laws, whereby physicians and others must report certain things to law enforcement. And so in Colorado, we've got a law that reads something like this. Physicians must file reports with the DMV, with Christina, whenever a patient is diagnosed with a condition that impairs their ability to drive safely. You know, seizure disorder, sleeping disorder, other types of disorders that make it dangerous for you to be driving a car. You've got to report that. Such report just includes the doctor's name, patient's name, and diagnosis. That's it. After you file it, the DMV reaches out, contacts the driver, and does its own little investigation and decides whether that person can keep their license or whether they need restrictions, no night driving, or you can only drive while you're on your meds. If the doctor complies with the notification, the doctor's all good. But if the doctor violates it, well, that's against the law. You've violated this mandatory duty to report law. So just a little context. Some of these dilemmas, we do have laws on point that guide you. So let's go to the next one, please. Let's just imagine Dr. Smith diagnoses a patient, Jane, with seizure disorders. Dr. Smith believes that this particular condition impairs Jane's ability to drive safely. Dr. Smith says, Jane, I got to report this. It's the law. Jane's upset. She realizes if the DMV knows she has this condition, she might lose her license. She's the leader of a local company employing hundreds of people. Any sort of restriction or loss of license would undermine her ability to lead her company, take care of her family and employees. Jane tells Dr. Smith, don't do it. If you make that report, I'll never see you again. In fact, I'll never see another healthcare provider again for treatment. Plus, I'll take all my employees, which I currently send to you, and I'll send them elsewhere. Plus bad reviews on Yelp, okay? So just don't do it. Let's see here. Whoop, back one, I'm sorry, Tracy, just back one. All right, one more click. Oh, all right, well, that's okay. We can leave it here. Y'all have the basic fact pattern in mind here? Report or not? First off, though, let's just imagine, can we, that there is no mandatory reporting law to make it a little harder. Okay, true fact. Jane's entire company gets its healthcare from Dr. Smith. Losing Jane's company would result in severe downsizing. Dr. Frazier, you want to go first on this one? What you might think of as a business owner or a healthcare provider? Let's imagine that law didn't exist first, though.
Okay, so we're in this scenario, the law of reporting does not exist.
Yeah, you just got to decide if you're going to let somebody know at the DMV, Christina, that this one shouldn't be driving anymore.
Okay, so first I would obviously let Jane calm down. I would try to, I guess this is where the peacekeeping and the criminal justice perspective actually would start coming in relation to kind of merging the medical ethics and the justice. Because if I didn't report this, and Jane had a seizure while driving and hit a family of 5, killing them, how would I feel? So that would be the first thing I would think. The next thing I would also think of is ask Jane herself how she would feel if that would happen. And then how she would feel if her family was in the car, because she obviously has a family, she's providing care for her family, and she killed her own family members when she had a seizure. And then I would try to appeal to her reason and sensibility. Obviously, if she's a business owner, hopefully she has her own business ethics, and try to reason with her in relation to, we need to do something in relation to this. You need to not be driving. And also in relation to seizures, once you're on medication and you're seizure free for 6 months, you can go back to driving. So I would try to appeal to her sense, since there's no sense of, there's no law right now of reporting, and see if we can do something and do some problem solving. Obviously, if she's her own, she owns her own company, maybe she can have someone drive her from her own company. Maybe it's her secretary who picks her up every day, or Uber, or something along those lines, and try to problem solve the situation. Because obviously it's a gut reaction. She sees her world going away right now. And how would I respond to that? Try to turn that into a positive situation with Jane herself, and see if we can solve the situation without necessarily having to report, but make sure everyone is still safe. Because that ultimately becomes the scenario, and that's where you do good and do no harm, because not reporting, or not at least reasoning with Jane and getting her to see reason, could potentially do serious harm.
Excellent. And folks, I see some great points in the comments. We're going to come back to those. We'll come back to those. Let me ask you this, Christina. What are your thoughts? Is this one too easy as a CJ professional?
I mean, it has to be reported. From my now current job at the DMV, we are the ones that give you your license. We are the ones that give you the license plates to your car, register your car, etc. Now, it might not be good if that's not reported, because if we do give you your license and you're off going to run your business and you have a seizure and you kill a family of 5, like Dr. Fraser said, that looks bad on us too, because we were the ones that gave you your license. But then it's bad on the doctor's side, because shouldn't they have reported it? Because overall, we're risking anyone's life. Anytime you go out on the road, you are risking your life. And if vital information is left out when giving you these, can't think of the word, but giving you these privileges to go and drive on our roads, it's not going to look good. But also, if this is supposed to be reported and the doctor's so afraid that they're going to lose business, if I'm a police officer and I come up on a scene where there's a family that's been killed, and I see that basically there was not some information taken care of on the DMV side or the doctor's side, basically we've created this whole mess because we've lost people. We have someone who is not properly medicated for their seizures, and the DMV did not take the precautions as well to make sure that everyone's safe. So overall, I think this needs to be reported.
Okay. And it looks like Angela agrees with this one. Straightforward. The doctor has to report or risk endangering his license and values and commitment to public safety. It is for her safety as well, even though she is panicked. Now, I guess, Dr. Fraser, what if you try the sort of peacemaking approach and you say, look, we can try some treatments, you can take a cab for a few weeks. What do you do if she just storms out and you watch her drive away and you know she shouldn't be doing that? Would you call Christina, or would you write a letter?
I mean, to be honest, as much as it would pain me, because this is where the whole, my business aspect and medical aspect, if you're asking me personally, what would I do? I'd first, if she stormed off and she had a seizure disorder, I'd call 911. and have police track her down first right off the bat, because right there she's a dangerous situation, and then I would report her. You'd have to. And then if she really decides to go that route of taking away her business, reports bad stuff on the internet, there's ways to get around that. There's always, you cannot please everyone 100% of the time. There's no way on the medical world you can do that. I mean, I can give you examples from today, we literally bend over backwards and someone's not happy when you've talked to them once per week and I'm not talking to them enough, right? So there is all situations where you're just not going to make somebody happy. And if they truly remove their business, there's other businesses out there. You get back out on the beat, so to speak, from the business perspective and start talking to other businesses, but you don't let your ethics go in relation to this. Absolutely not.
And I think, so the law maybe makes this one too easy, as Angela pointed out. Maybe this one's a little too straightforward. But Angela, you can see how you can mess with it, and you can come up with scenarios where there is no law directly on point. But I'm going to guess most of us feel deep down a duty to report here, and we do have a law. So I had to add the law because many of you know these things, and you're going to say, but there's a law. So excellent. Now, let's see, it's 5:30. I think what we're going to do now is I'm going to scroll up in the chat, look for some ideas, and we're going to open this up to some questions and answers. There were a few really, really good comments up here.
Can I respond to Steve real quick?
Absolutely.
It says,
Yes.
Write a prescription for medical transportation for everyone's safety. That doesn't exist. Just FYI. We've tried. And if it does exist, there's some medical transportation for some older folks and stuff like that. The VA has some transportation for medical aspects. But the other aspect is, okay, who's going to pay for it? Because the insurances will deny it every single time. So, Steve, I appreciate that. Trust me, we've tried stuff like that. But that doesn't exist.
So I see a comment from Sierra, going back to the telltale heart. What if Mr. Olson would die within 4 months, but Jill had 10 years? Would that make a difference? Excellent. I think so, Sierra. I think many of us would say Jill has a much greater chance of finding a heart now, and that probably would change our calculus. Sierra, would it change your calculus? Bet it would, right?
So interesting question on that, though. If person number one knew that number two was going to get the heart because they wanted the heart to go to Jill, would number one say, well, screw that, I want the heart instead?
Excellent. Yep. So number one could possibly do that, right? Excellent.
I mean, if you're going to say, well, the guy on death row's getting it before me, no.
Let's see here. I'm just sort of scrolling up here. Hey, you all can. Tracy, are they free to unmute and turn on the camera?
Sure, they can unmute, and we can, if they want to have their camera on, we'll see if their camera is on. But
okay. Well, just for anyone who wanted to, I feel bad if I missed your question, but also feel free. To pop up here and ask a question. I'm just scrolling through. Brian says, my decision on the heart would come down to the data. How often on average are hearts available? If she has 10 years, then the average wait for someone 27 is 5 years. It would make more sense to give it to Olson. Excellent. I'm not a math major, Brian, but I can see that math. That does make sense. If she has a very good chance of getting another one. I don't know that data though. Let's see here. Now I'm scrolling down here. My favorite question to businesses is, would you turn away a customer who is asking you to be unethical?
Yes, all the time.
Oh, and that's from Tracy. That's excellent, Tracy. And I think the Daniels Fund would say yes too, because the competitive advantage of not being unethical. Other people know I won't do things that are unethical. Therefore, customers are going to come to me, and suppliers are going to come to me, and because they know I'm not going to do things that are unethical.
Well, and if I might add, you have to think of it in the way of, if you do it for one person, you have to do it for everyone. Because, for example, at the DMV, you can't cut corners. I'm dealing with secure paperwork. So I can't change a name without a secure and verifiable identification form like a driver's license. And then they go tell their cousin Steve. Steve comes and he's like, well, you did it for Angie or whoever. So you have to make sure that in line with your ethics, you're not cutting corners, because like I just said, you do it for one, you got to do it for all. Otherwise, it's going to cause issues.
Excellent point. Thank you, Christina. Wow. I wonder, for folks out there, if anyone's brave enough to share, do any of these ethical approaches resonate with you? You finding yourself as a utilitarian or a deontologist or a medical ethicist? Any of these approaches completely unacceptable to you?
I think with the business, transparency is always a major one with me. You know, coming back to school after 25 years and getting kind of reintroduced to ethics, and it really opened my mind to a lot of scenarios that you can get into, and how important it is to be transparent and not try to hide it, is hit it off right at the very beginning and be honest. And I think you'll improve your business tenfold by doing that.
Yeah, and the transparency thing is really interesting. And sometimes, I'm sure, Dr. Frazier, you've heard this. You've got a patient who comes in and, they've got a terminal disease. And do you tell them? Or do you, I mean, is that more harmful or not, right? I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but that's sort of another classic debate where, do I tell them that they don't have that much longer to go, right? Because that might undermine what time they have left. I don't know if that situation is ever, but that's sort of a transparency question.
So it has happened several times. So I'll throw a little medical ethical dilemma into that. Say the person has a terminal disease, but also has dementia. Right? And so you're going to tell them, but they'll forget. And so you're going to tell, usually when someone has dementia, they have a durable power of attorney. And so they're usually with them. And so you tell that person, but the person with dementia forgets, because that's what happens. And then the DPO is like, well, I'm just not going to remind them about it. I'm going to let them live their life out. We can extend their life by doing X, Y, and Z, but they're deciding not to do that because they have dementia, and they're trying to just let them live the best life they can while they can. So that's ethically a very difficult one, because technically, that's the whole, are you extending the person's life? Do you force that? Are they doing the right by the person? That's where the autonomy comes in. So who's autonomous in that situation, right? I mean, legally speaking, it's the durable power of attorney, right? But the reason I'm saying this is I've had this problem. I had a conversation before the patient developed dementia, saying that they want everything done possible to extend their life. Okay, so now that's what that patient wants, but now they have dementia, doesn't remember any of that. But the DPOA says, no, we're not going to do that, even though that the patient wanted that beforehand. So,
excellent examples. Thank you.
I mean, in that situation was incredibly difficult.
I see a few more comments here. Austin, thank you. Having a set of ethical principles is important, so you're not just making decisions based on emotion, on what you think right then and there. Austin, so awesome. Having an approach that you can work through, that's the whole key here. I hope you all realize we're not trying to give you right answers, like what you should do, what's the best thing to do, but to have one of these approaches that you can use and sort of methodically work through dilemmas, that's the whole goal here. What if number one is in a coma? So Michael, yes. What if number one on the transplant list is in a coma? Do we get the heart? Excellent question. Hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to hang out here for a bit, as long as you want. It's 5:40. My goal was sort of to wrap up right around 5:45 to have an hour presentation and a few minutes of Q&A. So let me do this. Let me thank Dr. Frazier for taking time out of his day treating patients to be here and share a medical perspective. And let me thank Christina for taking time out of her day from her job as well. Both of them took time off of their day to be here with us and to share some of their experiences. So thank you so much, Dr. Frazier and Christina. It's wonderful to see you all here in cyberspace. And hey, everyone out there in cyberspace, thank you for attending. I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun. I hope some of these were easy and some just like, what would I do? Because I promise you, it will happen. You're going to be CJ professionals. And I know we have people from our medical programs as well. It's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to you. And if you have an approach you can go to reason through these things, that's all we can ask. And I want to thank Tracy and Alex and Annalise and the wonderful folks in the business school who made us look so professional and polished. Folks, they worked so hard to make this thing go well with no technical problems. So thank you all.